The price of a promise. The shouts of the angry crowd echoed through the narrow alleyways of Akwaaba. A thief at such a young age. She's a disgrace to us all. And the imbecile. It's a pity, a heavy-set woman muttered, shaking her head, her eyes devoid of sympathy. A child with no morals. A voice cut through the noise, filled with both urgency and fury. Please stop. Stop. Zayn stood frozen, his eyes locked on the small, trembling figure at the center of the mob. The little girl lay curled on the ground, her frail body taking blow after blow. As one kick landed, a thin, silver necklace flew from her neck. Zayn's breath caught, his eyes widening in disbelief. What did she steal? He demanded. I'll pay for it. Bread. She stole bread. A large man barked, his face flushed with self-righteous anger. That's how they grow up to be thugs. Another voice spat. This is Akwaaba, someone shouted from the back. If you steal, you pay with your life. Zayn's jaw tightened. I said, I'll pay for the bread. How much? He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick bundle of cash, and thrust it into the man's hands. Without waiting for a reply, he flung more notes into the air, forcing the crowd to scramble and giving him a moment to reach her. He scooped the girl into his arms. Her body was limp, her cheeks swollen, her dress torn. Zayn had been on his way home from a business meeting when he noticed the commotion. Men and women were chasing a small figure clutching a loaf of bread. 10 years in Akwaaba had taught him what mob justice looked like, and it always ended the same way. He had stopped his car, but by the time he reached the mob, they had already unleashed their wrath on her. A memory of old. The memory of another life, in a distant place, flashed through his mind. You can't leave me here, Zayn. Please, what will I do without you? Keisha's voice cracked, tears spilling freely down her face. Zayn's eyes softened, but his tone was steady. Keisha, I have to go. I can't stay here forever. I have to leave this village and find a better life for us. Keisha and Zayn had been friends first, then lovers. For over a decade, their lives had been intertwined. As children in the village of Kwame, they sat under the night sky, pointing at the stars and imagining what lay beyond. They fetched water from the stream together, worked side by side on their family's farmlands, and shared dreams as easily as laughter. Their parents had long agreed it was a match made in heaven. But as the years passed, Zayn began to see the world differently. He wanted more than the boundaries of their small village. The dreams that once felt distant now burned inside him like a fire. Then tragedy struck. His parents died suddenly, leaving him alone in the world. The loss hollowed him out and grief became his shadow. He shut down, terrified of loving anyone again, terrified of losing them, too. He began to push Keisha away until, finally, at 22, he left her behind for the city. On the day he left, Zayn took off his silver necklace and pressed it into her hand. I'll come back for you, he said. The words hung between them, fragile and uncertain. Deep down, he knew they sounded hollow even to him. Akwaaba, 10 years later. 10 years later, Akwaaba had a way of swallowing men whole. When Zayn first stepped off the rickety village bus onto the cracked pavements of the city, it smelled like sweat, petrol, and broken promises. He had nothing but a small bag, the clothes on his back, and a stubborn dream that refused to die. The first nights he slept at the bus park. The hard concrete was cold, and the noise of late-night drivers and early-morning hawkers was his lullaby. He worked any job that would pay. He carried cement at construction sites until his shoulders burned. He swept market stalls for a handful of coins. He sold bottled water in Akwaaba traffic, darting between impatient cars under the blistering sun. There were days his legs ached so badly that he couldn't stand, nights when hunger gnawed at him until sleep became the only escape. But Zayn never stopped moving. Every hardship became fuel. Every insult was a reminder that he would not stay at the bottom. He saved what little he could. When an opportunity came to work as an office cleaner, he took it, showing up in a worn shirt and his only pair of decent shoes. He was quiet, observant, listening to conversations, and watching deals being made. The language of business became his new dream. Years passed. One opportunity led to another. Zayn learned to negotiate, to read contracts, to take risks. He started with small ventures, buying and selling phone accessories, flipping land in the outskirts of the city, investing in transport businesses. Each success gave birth to a bigger one. Now, a decade later, Zayn was one of the most powerful men in Akwaaba. His name opened doors. He owned high-rise apartments, fleets of cars, and businesses that stretched from the city's heart to its furthest suburbs. The boy who once slept in bus parks now held meetings in glass towers overlooking the city skyline. But power had not hardened him. It had sharpened his memory. He had never forgotten the nights he went to bed hungry, the days he was looked at as less than human. It was on one such day, returning from a board meeting, that he saw the angry mob. And there, in the chaos, was a little girl whose terror mirrored his own memories. Zayn didn't just see a thief. He saw himself. The necklace. Zayn's hands were trembling slightly as he held the little girl close in his arms. His thoughts were racing, too fast for him to catch. The necklace she wore, small and delicate, swung gently against her bruised chest, and Zayn couldn't stop staring at it. It was the same necklace Keisha had worn that night he left her. He could almost hear the echoes of his voice, the promise he had made, "I'll come back for you." But this was not Keisha. This was a child, an innocent girl caught in the unforgiving streets of Akwaaba. Yet the necklace around her neck had stirred something deep in him, something he didn't want to face. Was it a sign? He couldn't tell. But he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had made a promise once, and he wasn't about to break it again. "Take her to my personal doctor," Zayn said, his voice low but firm. His chauffeur, startled by the sudden shift in Zayn's usual calm demeanor, nodded without question. Zayn's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained silent, clutching the girl even closer as they drove through the chaotic Akwaaba streets. The doctor's office was pristine, the walls lined with certificates. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the fragile child in his arms, the one whose life had almost been taken by a cruel mob. "She's severely bruised and dehydrated," the doctor murmured, checking the girl's vitals. "A couple of broken ribs, too. She's lucky to be alive." Zayn nodded, his chest tightening. He felt helpless. Even though he had the means to change this girl's life, she had been discarded like trash for stealing a loaf of bread. The injustice of it all ate at him, gnawing away at the edges of his mind. As the doctor worked, Zayn stood by, waiting. But his thoughts kept drifting back to that necklace. What if it was a sign? What if it was a sign that he had failed Keisha? That all his wealth and power meant nothing if he couldn't even keep the promises he made? Minutes turned into hours, and Zayn found himself pacing the room. He hadn't noticed how badly his heart was racing until he heard the doctor's voice again, bringing him back to the present. "She's stable now. She'll need time to heal, but she'll make it." Zayn exhaled in relief, his shoulders loosening for the first time since he found her on the streets. But something inside him was still unsettled. The girl's life was forever changed, but so was his. He could feel the weight of her future, as if it had somehow been handed to him, a man who had once been broken, but now had the power to fix things. The room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of machines and the faint hum of the air conditioner. Zayn stood at the foot of the bed, staring down at the little girl whose broken body lay beneath the crisp white sheets. She hadn't said a word since he brought her in. Her eyes were wide and terrified, constantly darting around as if waiting for the next blow. Zayn could see the fear in her eyes, the kind that clung to you like a shadow, never letting go. She was too scared to speak, too broken to trust. His heart ached for her. He gently brushed her hair back from her forehead, his touch soft, careful not to cause her any more pain. "I won't leave you like this," he whispered, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'll come back for you, I promise." The girl didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her small chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. Zayn could feel the weight of her silence, the distance she had put between herself and the world. He couldn't blame her. People had already shown her how ugly the world could be. But Zayn wasn't like them. He wouldn't hurt her. He turned to the doctor, who had been standing by quietly monitoring the girl's condition. "Make sure she lacks nothing," Zayn said, his voice firm but gentle. "Give her whatever she needs to heal. Pay attention to her recovery. She's not just a case, doctor. She's someone's future." The doctor nodded, a look of understanding crossing his face. Zayn had seen it many times before, that silent acknowledgement when someone truly cared for another person's well-being. Zayn then turned to the nurses who had been quietly preparing the room. "I'll cover her bills," he continued, his voice low. "No matter how long she stays, no matter how expensive it gets, don't worry about the cost. Make sure she's safe." He paused, looking back at the girl one last time before leaving. "I'll be back," he promised again. The girl's eyes flickered for a brief moment, as if she had heard the sincerity in his voice, but still she said nothing. Zayn left the hospital in the early evening, the bustling sounds of Aquaba fading behind him as he stepped into his sleek black SUV. His mind was occupied with the weight of his promise, and his heart ached with the knowledge that she was still there, alone in that sterile room, too afraid to speak. The city around him was a blur. His mind was focused on one thing, returning to her. The girl who had stolen a loaf of bread, the girl who had been left for dead, now held the key to something Zayn had long since forgotten, his own humanity. For so long, he had buried his past under layers of wealth and success, thinking that money and power were enough to fill the emptiness. But now he understood it wasn't the city that had shaped him. It was the promise he had made all those years ago, the love he had left behind in the village. As the car sped through the streets, Zayn's thoughts drifted back to Keisha. He had never forgotten her, but he had buried the good old times so he didn't have to live in the pain. He believed he was a new person. But this fragile girl was a reminder of everything he had lost, everything he had left behind. "I'll come back for you," he whispered to himself, his voice filled with resolve. "Just like I promised." Zayn stepped into his luxurious home, the familiar scent of fresh perfume filling the air. He had just returned from the hospital, still haunted by the little girl he had promised to protect. Yet as he entered the living room, his world seemed to shift back to reality. Serafina was there, standing near the window, her long hair cascading over her shoulders as she turned to him with a smile. Her smile was always warm, but tonight it felt particularly calculated. "You're back," she said softly, her voice soothing. Leo, their young son, ran to him with open arms, his small voice bubbling with excitement. "Daddy!" Zayn couldn't resist a smile as he bent down to lift his boy into his arms. The joy on Leo's face made everything feel normal. Zayn kissed Leo's forehead, murmuring, "Hey, champ." But even as he held his son, something deep inside him still felt unsettled. Serafina approached, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You've been gone a while," she said, her eyes softening. "You should have called." Zayn looked at her, his expression distant. "I'm fine, Serafina. Just needed some time to think." He couldn't tell her the truth, that his mind was preoccupied with the girl in the hospital, the pain he had witnessed in her eyes, the promise he had made to her. Zayn had been afraid to truly love again, and yet here was Serafina, ever persistent, always there, her love for him seemingly unyielding. But was it truly love, or something else? She moved closer, her touch light as she ran a finger across his chest. "We could make things right," Serafina said, her voice low and intimate. "For Leo. For us." Zayn looked at her, torn between his past and present, the remnants of his fear of losing anyone else. He had already buried so much of himself in his work, in his success, in his distance from true intimacy. But Serafina had a way of making him feel like he could build something real again. And yet, even as Serafina held him close, there was something about her that unsettled Zayn. She had moved in with him a while ago, trying to bring their fractured relationship back together. She spoke of a future with him and of their family, but underneath the surface of her carefully crafted affection, Zayn sensed something was wrong. Serafina always seemed to be pushing for more, a little too hard, a little too often. At first, Zayn thought it was her love for him, but over time, he started to wonder if it was something else, something darker lurking beneath her charming smile. What Zayn didn't know was that Serafina wasn't just playing the role of the devoted mother and girlfriend. She had another lover, Liam, someone she truly loved. Liam was everything Zayn was not, untouched by the pressures of the business world, and a man who seemed to understand Serafina in a way Zayn never could. Their affair was a secret, carefully hidden behind Serafina's facade of a devoted partner. Zayn never suspected, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was always just out of reach with Serafina. She was too perfect, too eager to please. And yet, there was always an underlying tension, something she didn't want him to uncover. Serafina's relationship with Liam wasn't just about passion. It was about power. She was using Zayn, setting herself up for a future where she could claim his wealth, his success, and everything he had worked for. Liam was her partner in this scheme, and together, they had devised a plan to slowly strip Zayn of everything. But Zayn was too afraid to love, to trust anyone completely again. He didn't know what Serafina was truly up to. He was still holding on to a past filled with pain, unable to see the present clearly. The next morning, Zayn returned to the hospital. He had spent the night thinking about the girl, Anya, and the promise he had made to her. He couldn't leave her alone. Not like this. Not after everything she had been through. As he entered her room, the doctor gave him the good news. Anya was stable and her wounds were healing. She was sitting up now, her head resting against the pillow, eyes tired but clear. When she saw Zayn, she looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving my life." Zayn offered her a soft smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "You don't have to thank me, Anya. I couldn't just leave you there." He helped her to her feet gently, careful not to cause her more pain. "I'm Anya," she added, her voice still fragile. Zayn nodded. "It's good to meet you, Anya." As he helped her into the car, Zayn couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for her. When they arrived at his mansion, Zayn opened the door, and there stood Serafina along with Leo. The moment they saw Anya, their expressions froze. Serafina's face paled, her lips pressed into a thin line, while Leo's eyes narrowed with confusion and disdain. "Who is this?" Leo asked, his tone harsh as he looked Anya up and down like she was an intruder. Zayn stood his ground. "This is Anya. She's staying with us for a while." He looked at his son, hoping to ease the tension, but it only grew. Anya stood there awkwardly, still weak from her injuries, unsure how to behave in this strange new environment. She had never known anything but the streets. "A beggar," Leo scoffed, his face scrunched in disapproval. "Why are you bringing someone like that into our house, Dad?" Zayn's patience was wearing thin. He tried to smile at Leo, but the words he wanted to say were heavy, weighing down his chest. He bent down to Leo's level, trying to soften the moment. "Come on, Leo, be kind. She's just had a rough time, like so many people in this city. Let's not be cruel." Leo crossed his arms and glared at Zayn, clearly not ready to accept the girl into their lives. "I don't want her here," he muttered, storming off to his room, slamming the door behind him. Serafina didn't say anything immediately, but her eyes, cold and calculating, never left Anya. "Who is she?" Serafina's voice was sharp, her question dripping with disinterest. Zayn straightened, his tone hardening. This is not up for discussion, Serafina. I'll talk to you about it later. Right now, I need you to be understanding. He glanced over at Anya, offering a reassuring smile. Come in and feel at home, Anya. Anya hesitated, but followed Zayn into the house. She didn't feel at home, not yet, but she could see the faintest traces of warmth in Zayn's eyes, and that was enough to make her trust him a little more. Zayn turned to a maid who had been waiting nearby. Please take care of Anya, get her some new clothes, help her with a bath, and bring her down when she's ready for dinner. The maid nodded and gently led Anya upstairs. Zayn exhaled deeply, frustration still simmering beneath his calm exterior. Later that evening, the tension reached a boiling point. As they sat down for dinner, Leo continued to sulk, his eyes shooting glances at Anya every now and then, as if she were an unwanted guest. Why is she even here? Leo muttered under his breath. She's just a beggar. She's not even supposed to be in our house. Zayn's temper flared. Leo, enough. You will show respect in this house or there will be consequences. Leo, however, wasn't done. He tossed his food onto the floor with a loud thud, causing everyone at the table to freeze. I don't care. I want her gone, he shouted before storming off to his room, slamming the door with such force that the walls shook. Anya flinched, the noise too much for her fragile state. She stood up quickly, her hands shaking as she backed away from the table, still recovering from her injuries. She made her way to her room, fear flashing in her eyes. Zayn clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He didn't move right away, but when Serafina opened her mouth, her words hit him like a slap. Zayn, you're choosing a stranger over your own family. Serafina's voice was cold, laced with anger. You're letting her take over everything. Zayn didn't meet her gaze. This isn't about choosing her over you, Serafina. This is about doing the right thing. His voice was low but firm. And right now, I'm not going to let my son treat another human being like that. Zayn stood up from the table, his heart racing. He couldn't just sit there and pretend everything was fine. He couldn't ignore the little girl who had already been through so much. He grabbed Anya's plate of food and walked quietly upstairs, his footsteps heavy. The house felt too big, too empty, even though Serafina and Leo were close by. When Zayn reached Anya's room, he paused at the door, hearing the quiet sobs that broke the silence of the space. He pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw nearly broke him in that moment. Anya was sitting on the floor, her small body curled up in a way that made her seem even younger than she was. She clutched the necklace tightly in her hand, tears streaming down her face. Mama, she sobbed, her voice trembling. You said this necklace will take me to Dad. I'm so alone and I miss you. Zayn froze at the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. The words echoed in his mind, drowning out the world around him. The necklace. Dad. He slowly stepped inside, his legs feeling heavy as he approached her, the plate of food trembling in his hands. He dropped it gently on the small table beside her, his gaze never leaving her face. He sat down next to her on the floor, unsure of what to say, his own throat constricting with emotion. Zayn could see the pain in Anya's eyes, raw and unfiltered. He reached for her hand, his own shaking. Anya, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Your necklace, who gave it to you? Anya looked up at him, her big brown eyes meeting his. And in that moment, Zayn saw something that made his heart stop. Her eyes were the same as Keisha's, the same as the woman he had once loved and left. But Zayn was too afraid to believe it, to let himself hope. He needed to hear it from her. Mama gave me the necklace, Anya whispered, tears staining her cheeks. She said, if Dada sees it, he will remember. Zayn's breath caught in his chest. His mind spun. Could it be? He had tried to bury his past, but now it was staring him in the face. Keisha's name, her promise to him, and this little girl who seemed to hold the key to everything he had run from. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he asked, "What is the name of your mama?" Anya sniffed, her voice small and full of longing. "Keisha. I wish my mama was here." Zayn felt his knees weaken. He bent his head, trying to steady himself, but the weight of the moment was too much. His heart was pounding, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't keep up with. There were possibilities he hadn't dared consider. But the more Anya spoke, the more he couldn't ignore the aching truth that was slowly becoming clear. He wasn't sure if he could be the dad she was looking for. But the idea ate at him, refusing to let go. He had been afraid to love, to commit to anything or anyone. But now, it felt as though everything was leading him back to a moment he had promised never to return to. "How old are you?" Zayn asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the question could give him the answer he desperately needed. "I'm 9, going on 10, sir." Anya's voice cracked as she looked up at him, her eyes full of hope despite her pain. "Do you think you can help me find my dada?" Zayn nodded slowly, his chest tightening. "I will. I will try, Anya." But something else tugged at his heart, pulling him even deeper into the confusion of this moment. "What about your mama?" Zayn asked softly, afraid of what he might hear, but needing to know. Anya's face crumpled, her sobs growing louder as she hugged the necklace to her chest. "She's sick and weak," she sobbed, her voice barely audible. "And lately she sleeps, and she won't open her eyes. I begged her to open her eyes, but she won't. I miss her so much." Zayn's heart shattered. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping her up in his warmth, holding her as she cried. He couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to comfort her. He must be the dad she was looking for,